what I really focused on was creative cognition, but looking at how psychedelics relates to all of those P's of creativity.
What's going on, everybody? This week's episode of the Good Trip Podcast features a conversation with a good friend of mine, Miss Laura Dawn. Laura is an author, a keynote speaker, and host of the Psychedelic Leadership Podcast, and we had an awesome deep dive into the connection of psychedelics and creativity. And I would like to creatively encourage you to go check out my new tour dates at brettpella.com. I'm hitting all kinds of cities throughout the spring. Florida, I'm out in Florida. I know that's not a city, but I'm in multiple cities in Florida. I'm doing a couple of music festivals that I haven't announced yet, but at this point, they might be up on my website, so go check it out. Sacramento, San Francisco, San Diego, Escondido, Austin, Texas, and so many more. Alabama, I'm coming for you. brettpella.com/shows. And this conversation with Laura Dawn dove into the role that psychedelics can play with encouraging creativity, and not just creativity in the traditional sense of the word, where you think, oh, creativity, that means art of some form, right? Like paintings or poetry or comedy or whatever. No, Laura explains that there are other approaches toward creative thinking that can be facilitated with the use of psychedelics. And that's where her work stems from. That's what she speaks about. It's what she researches. It's what she practices. She's an amazing human being doing amazing work in the world. But first, a quick shout out to the sponsors of this podcast. Y'all make sure you support the sponsors so that the sponsors can support the podcast, so that the podcast can support your life, and we can all just support each other. It's like a support orgy with no sex, just support. The Good Trip Podcast Season 2 is brought to you by Legit Gold, Shilajit, and Hemp Lucid CBD. Two of my favorite products in the world that I've been using for a very long time on an absolute daily basis. And I promise I have felt the benefit from both of these companies, both of these products, and I highly encourage y'all to check out legitgold.com and hemplucid.com to learn more about how their products can help optimize your overall health. Shilajit is a mineral-rich resin that accumulates deep in the Himalayan mountains, and Legit Gold, which is a US-based, family-owned and operated company, works with local Sherpas out in the Himalayas who travel up 16,000 feet to extract this resin, and then they test it at a third-party accredited lab for purity and quality. It's heavy metal free, and it's been researched and scientifically studied for its positive effects on cognition. For me, it helps with mental clarity and focus, how it can boost testosterone in men and balance your hormones. There's so much more amazing benefits that you can feel from Legit Gold Shilajit. So learn more about it at legitgold.com and use promo code Brent for 15% off your order. That's legitgold.com, L-A-J-I-T, gold.com. Use code Brent for 15% off. And when you're done focusing on stuff for the day, de-stress, relax, allow your body to heal with Hemp Lucid CBD, which is created with a proprietary strain of USDA certified organic CBD. Very rare in the CBD market for a company to actually commit to putting good into the world using 100% organic ingredients. But Hemp Lucid does just that. I really dig their MCT oil. MCT oil is derived from coconuts and is a carrier for CBD to aid in the body's absorption of that CBD. They also have topical lotions and creams on their site, as well as a water-soluble version of CBD, which is created using advanced nanotechnology that actually breaks the CBD down into more bioavailable, tiny little particles that your body can absorb it and put it to use quicker. I also really dig the mushroom-based gummies that they have using lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, ashwagandha, and some other amazing ingredients. They have 3 different types of gummies that actually taste very delicious. Like, they taste good, they're refreshing, and they're good. It's not like candy, so it's not like you're gonna wanna eat the entire thing, but you are gonna start feeling really good right away. I feel really good right away, so I hope that's how you feel too. There are 3 different types of gummies that they got. One to help you ease into sleep, one to help aid your focus during the day, and one to help you de-stress, which we all need to do a little bit more. Learn more about what Hemp Lucid has to offer at hemplucid.com. Use promo code PELLA for a discount. Here is this week's trip with Laura Dawn.
How are you? How's your life?
Such a big loaded question. I'm like, life is an obstacle course in the best sense. And I think if you have the right mindset to tackle every day like it's an obstacle course, then it's easier to navigate.
Yeah. You know, sometimes people ask me, how's it going? And I have that same kind of pause because it's going in so many directions. It's going all over the place.
I
You
know.
know?
And if you just say fine, then you're just not paying attention.
Yeah, yeah. The answer can't just be good or like a high pitched good. You know?
Yeah. You're like, oh, so we're at that level of superficial relating.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's fine. It's good. Things are fine. I'm drinking water. I'm breathing air. I'm alive. So,
I'm more like, things are complex
yeah.
and it's full spectrum living. And I mean, through all of it, I think I still come back to I am grateful to be alive and to be breathing air right now, and come back to that as home base. And you kind of need to have some kind of anchor like that in today's reality
Yeah.
when things are weird out there.
100%. What are some of the things that you use as anchors? What are a couple of the like top go-to anchors that you use when you feel like you're trapped in a maze?
Yeah. I mean, breath is definitely, it's a real one, but also water. I have to carve out time out of my day to be disciplined actually about taking breaks, because I definitely fall into the habit of overworking and doing. So I really do have to very consciously, intentionally on a daily basis be like, okay, I'm going to go down to the river and the waterfalls. And it's funny because usually I'll take a snapshot of that and I'll post that on social media, and everyone will immediately be like, you don't work and you're a trust fund baby and all of these things. And I'm like, oh God, that's like so far from the truth of it. But water and humor too, because I think you can't not navigate today's reality and find humor in it. If you don't, it's just like that's the well of like despair and depression.
Totally.
So the levity is, I think, important, and psychedelics help with that.
Yep. Yeah, the water part is in recent years for sure. I've integrated water into my life in new ways that have helped like tremendously. Getting in water first thing in the morning. I take a cold shower every morning, which if you take a cold shower, you're supposed to tell other people that you take a cold shower. It's part of the rules.
It's the Huberman protocol.
Exactly. Yeah. I started taking cold showers a couple of years ago, and it was kind of off and on. And then I noticed like whenever I just got my body wet, like even if I'm on the road, if I'm at a hotel, if there's a pool, I jump in the pool first thing in the morning. There's something about just like submerging in water that kind of wakes up my cells first thing in the morning. So that and chugging a huge glass of water when I get out of bed, that usually kind of aligns me in the right way to look forward to the day. So yeah, a lot of those tools are very important, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I wanted to recap our experience out in Denver together because that was so fun. We went to the Psychedelic Science Conference, the MAPS conference out in Denver, and it was such a blast. That was the first time I think we've met in person too, right? Yeah. How was your experience out there?
I mean, I love the conference circuit, the psychedelic conference circuit. I get to see a lot of people that I really only see at the psychedelic conferences, a lot of my colleagues and friends. So it's always fun. And this one definitely felt like more of a watershed moment in the movement, with 12,000 people coming together for what is, the transitioning. We're midwifing psychedelic compounds into the mainstream right now. So it had an extra sense of poignancy, and it's always fun to just let loose and party and just like relax a bit. After I spoke on Thursday night, it was like, okay, let's go shake it and go let loose, which is also, I think, a really helpful, tool in our reality of just, being so focused all the time and just being able to actually loosen the grip.
Yeah, and that's a really cool community to get loose with. Everybody there puts a value on, they put a lot of value in kind of allowing yourself the permission to get to loosen up, to loosen your boundaries, to break down some social barriers or social walls, and people from all ages, races, sizes, colors, spectrums were out there and at the after parties and in the community moments, hanging out in the lobbies and the conference rooms and everything, pre and post talks. It just felt like a really cool energy to be a part of. And you could tell just by being there. This was my first bigger psychedelic conference that I'd ever been to. You could tell, I could tell that ethos is something that kind of drives everybody in their work too. That ethos of creating community, having these high energy moments of human connection. That's what everybody at that conference wants to facilitate in a bigger way outward into society, which was rad.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. I also felt like there were some pretty big topics of conversation that were very largely lacking from the lineup of speakers, including creativity. I was like, wow, you guys are like, you're supposed to be at the forefront of like finger on the pulse of, what the emergent conversations in the space. And I spoke on a different topic, but I really do hope that the next conference that there's a more openness to exploring the topic of creativity and actually from a very legitimate sense, and I think we think immediately about creativity as like music and art and comedy, but it's so much more than that. It's the most critical thinking skill of our time. It's the most critical skill set for navigating this obstacle course of life and bringing validity to that. And so it's interesting in the intersection of the work that I do, I'm not just at the sort of forefront of the rebranding of the narrative around psychedelics, but also around creativity too, that it's so much more than just aesthetic beauty and poetry and art and dance, but it's actually a way of life, and that it's actually central to the therapeutic process. And I'm not just talking about art therapy, I'm talking about learning how to fundamentally perceive differently. It's actually a foundational aspect to what catalyzes change in our lives and transformation.
So that's really cool. I want to go a little deeper on your perspective toward creativity, because I know you have a degree in it, a degree in science and creativity. And I'm curious, when you talk about creativity in that sense, and we're not talking about paper mache and collages and movies. We're talking about, I love paper mache. It's been so long since I made it. But you're specifically speaking about approaching different topics of thought in a new way than what might be considered the traditional approach, right? Can you take me a little bit deeper on like the way you would discuss creativity in that sense?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to sort of put a map to help us orient the conversation, because creativity is so ephemeral that it's hard to pin down, just like psychedelics. It's like hard to say that it's one thing. So we can think about the 5 P's of creativity. There's the creative person, the creative process that we go through, the creative outcome, what was called the creative product, but I think of it as like the purpose or passion. And then we have the place, our environment, and how our environment affects our ability to be creative. And then we have creative practices, ways that we can actually learn how to enhance creativity. So what I really focused on was creative cognition, but looking at how psychedelics relates to all of those P's of creativity. And so when we talk about, the creative outcome in terms of like music and art, we can also look at the process that people go through to develop that. But then we can also look at creative cognition and understand that it's essentially breaking free from habitual ways of thinking, and it's thinking differently. I mean, you're a comic, so you think about this as central to the work that you do. It's like finding a different beat, so that, and doing the unexpected thing. And there's so many practices that we can learn to develop to look at things differently. And actually the psychedelic landscape, the experience we go into in terms of a mode of cognition called unconstrained cognition, where we untether ourselves from this is the way reality is, this is who I am, the default mode network quiets down. There's more freedom, like different parts of yourself can come online. And that's why we find things very funny. There's actually a lot of reasons that we find things very funny in the psychedelic space, but that the atmosphere, like the psychedelic landscape, is actually a fundamental training ground for teaching all of these aspects of creativity. It's actually embedded in it, but we don't talk about it from that perspective, because right now the majority of the narrative is talking about how do we leverage psychedelics to cure PTSD, depression, anxiety, and addiction. And that's great. And I'm really happy that we're focusing on that. And I would say that the majority of people actually seeking out psychedelic experiences who are struggling with clinical depression is actually probably a much smaller percentage than people who are wanting to explore for psychospiritual purposes. And so much of my work actually reframes and flips the script, which is actually a creative thinking skill, reframing and flipping something upside down. And the starting point for my work is not how do we work with psychedelics to reduce depression, but how do we engage these compounds to enhance human flourishing. And creativity is a foundational aspect of what it means to be flourishing on our planet today.
Yeah. So when you do this work, how do you break it down to somebody who's brand new to the space, that feels maybe a bit trapped in their own modes of thinking, that feels like they might have a little bit of a block, they're in a space in life where they're repeating habits, they're feeling that they have that habitual pattern of thought? How do you encourage them to find a new channel of thinking? Because that might feel like kind of a what's the word? A vague topic, but it's not. I know it's not, because I know exactly what you're talking about. But for somebody brand new to this space, how do you remove that sense of ambiguity for them so that they can start to understand new tools that they can use to actually think creatively about their life or different problems or situations?
Yeah, it's such a great question, especially because a lot of the work that I do is with other coaches and leaders in the psychedelic space who already have a base. So, but the foundation, even underneath starting to talk about creativity, is actually talking about the neuroscience of perception. And I know that that sounds like a mouthful, like, oh my God, I'm immediately going to shut down and be like, I don't know anything about that. But when we actually start breaking down the attentional network system in the brain, the quality of the experience of our lives has so much to do with what we focus on and what we choose to pay attention to. So a lot of ruminative thinking is actually because we keep paying attention to the same information over and over and over again. So the analogy I like to use, and these are foundational modules that I usually teach before we get into the sort of deeper layer of creativity, because creativity is actually embedded in all of it. But I really like to educate people about how we perceive. And when we look at reality around us, we're actually exposing our brain to like 11, 12 billion bits of information, of data points. But we hone in on a pinprick of information, and that's what we basically feed the mind to tell ourselves a story of what reality is and who we are. So we reinforce, I know this sounds woo, but this is actually neuroscience, that we see what we believe. So if I was raised by parents that taught me that money is really hard to come by, which is a very strong narrative in our culture, then it's easier, it's more energy efficient for my brain to look for information that validates that, rather than proving my brain wrong and looking for new information. And that's actually how we get stuck in loops. And the interesting part about it is that when we start working with psychedelics, it actually opens the door of perception, as Aldous Huxley talks about. Yeah. It's basically widening our perceptual apparatus so that we start looking at information from a fresh perspective, essentially. So I can then use a creative thinking skill like, is that true? Is money really hard to come by? Or what other information can I look for and train my brain to look for that basically tells a different narrative? And so much of who we are and the quality of the experience of our lives comes down to the story we tell ourselves about who we are, what we're capable of, what's possible, what's not possible. And literally the journey of creativity, but also transformation, is learning how to break frame, step outside of that frame of reference, and literally expand the boundaries of what we believe is possible by saying, okay, yeah, maybe that pinprick of data is true, but look, there's also something else over here that you can pay attention to. And it's about training your mind to pay attention in a different way and look for new information that tells a different story about who you are and what's possible.
Yeah, you're challenging your brain to operate differently. And in doing so, with the use of some of these compounds, you're creating neuroplasticity. You're literally creating new pathways of thinking within the brain. That's awesome. What was your first step into this space? Had you experienced some of that, some of those feelings that you're describing entering into the space of psychedelics and work within the creative sciences?
Yeah, so I'm a bit, I would say, of an anomaly, and it's a little interesting to answer that question because I had my first high dose psilocybin experience when I was 14. And so that was over 25 years ago now. So psychedelics raised me. They like literally shaped me into the woman that I am today. But as a child, I grew up as a competitive athlete. So there was a very strong mindset of focus, of grit, of determination, of competing, a very strong, serious side. I took competing very seriously. And so when I came out of that phase and started journeying with psilocybin, it was like seeing just the ironic humor of what it means to be alive and taking ourselves so seriously and being so focused when the truth is we're all going to die. And that's just the true nature of reality. And so, you know, between that was a really strong parallel. Like my journey with psychedelics also really paralleled my journey around Tibetan Buddhism and Eastern philosophy and understanding these teachings that have really helped save my life. Because when I was younger in my teenage years, I did struggle with addiction and depression and disordered eating, and they helped enormously come out of those ruminative patterns to be able to look up at the universe, at the sky, and think, wow, that is hilarious that I thought that my problems were, you know, that all consuming and important, and that I should waste the preciousness of literally the miracle of what it means to be conscious on this narrow focus and go round and round the hamster wheel. And it's so interesting because someone who also studied addiction for many years, that was a big focus. I worked with people with addiction for many years. It was a big central part of my practice. And when I evolved and not evolved, but my own evolution of moving on from that space and moving more into creativity, I couldn't believe the parallels that I would see. Addiction is like being a hamster in a wheel going around and round and round. And healing from addiction is actually learning how to step off the hamster wheel. It's actually the same underlying neural mechanisms that make us creative. It's stepping off of the hamster wheel, choosing a divergent thought. It's breaking frame, breaking free from the conventional thinking of our mind. And one of my favorite definitions of creativity is by Arthur Koestler, who said, creativity is the defeat of habit by originality. And that's really what we can say about the healing of depression. It's the defeat of habit by originality. It's choosing a new thought. And when I really immersed into creative research, which is kind of ironic because I grew up, my two biggest limiting beliefs were I'm not smart and I'm not creative. I couldn't draw sitting next to Jenica next to me who could draw. And I would just like crumble when my teacher would be like, you're never going to be creative. You're just not going to be an artist.
You'll never be Jenica. You'll never. Jenica looks over at you and just like, "Nyeh."
Exactly. And it's funny, I recently heard Brene Brown talk about this in her research that 80% of people had an experience in school where their teacher instilled like a negative belief in them that influenced like the rest of their lives. And
Wow.
50% of those 80%, it was about creativity. So I find it interesting. And that's why I do feel so passionate about reframing the narrative. And there are so many deeply ingrained myths in our culture about creativity. Like you either have it or you don't. You know, it looks like this, you can't develop it. You're either gifted or you're not, you know? So I feel really passionate about reframing that narrative alongside the narrative around what's possible with psychedelics, because what we call them, how we approach them, you know, whether we say, okay, this is, you know, a tool for healing depression, the way we think about our journey, preparation, integration is going to be very different than if I hand you a substance and I'm like, this is an ideogen. Engage with it as the most potent catalyst for good ideas and use it wisely. I mean, it just sets a totally different frame for how we navigate it. And mostly people don't even realize, the majority of people don't realize that the narrative that's paving the pathway for psychedelics into Western culture is through the clinical frame of reference. It's as a therapy. And we needed that for FDA approval and for, you know, overcoming the Nixon era war on drugs, you know, propaganda, that we had to overcome that. And I think probably the clinical frame was the best, you know, pathway for the reemergence of psychedelics in the acceptance of them in our culture. But I'm also staking a claim in the ground and saying it's so much more than that. And so please don't be a therapist who comes up to me after journeying for 1 year and start poo-pooing recreational use of psychedelics. Please don't do that to me.
Yeah. No, the clinical way, I would certainly agree. It's the best path in, because you create nonpartisan support toward things like helping veterans or helping treat PTSD. But the tree branches that'll stem off from that deserve so much recognition. I have no idea what the timelines will be like. I know MDMA is in stage 3 for therapy, and then psilocybin will follow shortly after. But this specific subject, this topic of changing the way you think about problems, issues. What was the quote you from Arthur Koestler? Yeah, he said,
creativity is the defeat of habit by originality.
The defeat of habit by originality. That is so important, because like you said before, so many people think of creativity as what you make in with like physical matter, right? Like what you make for other people to experience, whether it's art, music, whatever. But the creative mode of thinking to break those habits, that's gonna cure people of just being dumb. That could cure this whole country of being idiots. I mean, there's a lot of dumb out there, you know? I got so much love for so many people, and there's so much good happening, but yeah, this country's also a nightmare multiple times per week now. And if and when we can start encouraging these substances and these compounds to be used for breaking out of habitual thinking, then yeah, the term creativity will be looked at differently, because it does feel like there's a certain I don't know if stigma is the right word, but there is like it's got the term creativity and the conversation around what it means to be creative has a certain stigmatized weight to it, as if it's just easy to say I'm not creative because I don't write poetry. I'm not creative because I don't make movies.
Right. And even in the business world, it's changing. Like innovation, huge buzzword. Everyone wants to be innovative in what they're doing, products, you know, being at the forefront. But actually, innovation is just applied creativity, and creativity is applied imagination. And actually, psychedelics really teach us how to play in that field of imagination. And it's so funny to also think about this word imagination, that a corporate leader wouldn't be like, oh, I practice imagination. But we are literally engaging in an internal reality all the time. We are guided by our internal landscape. And the more that we become aware of mental imagery and the power of mental imagery and learn how to work with different tools, psychedelics are one tool for enhancing imagination, enhancing internal mental imagery and catalyzing that to fuel creativity, to fuel innovation. Now I'm speaking the language of a lot of people in corporate America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what types of contrasts, if any, have you seen between microdosing psychedelics and doing bigger experiences in regards to trying to open up a new path with creative thinking, either for yourself or in your work with others? Do you see differences in those two experiences?
I mean, totally, especially when we're talking about really high dosing and going really deep versus, a micro amount. There's also mini dosing, which is becoming more of a thing now. And then when you start looking at different substances, that takes it to a whole different dimensional matrix. Mm-hmm. It's like there are continuums of spectrums, and it's so interesting because all of them are really an opportunity to come to understand the nature of mind, really is what we're talking about here, and cognition, and even overcoming the myth that cognition is from the neck up, that actually the way that we think and the way that we process information can be a whole body experience, right? And that we also think better when we're moving. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can understand cognition and thinking better, thinking optimally, and refining the way that we pay attention. And it's really helpful to refine and sharpen our cognitive apparatus when we understand it. And mm-hmm. medicines are really a very powerful tool for helping us to understand the nature of mind, the way that we can focus from a very narrow focus, spotlight consciousness versus open focus, lantern consciousness. We can actually train the mind, and we don't get that kind of training. We're not taught those kinds of tools, but there are people developing, these understandings, like the field of embodied cognition. What I choose to wear in this conversation is going to influence the things that I say and how I think and the words that I speak. If I'm sitting here in my pajamas, that's going to influence my thinking. We don't think about it in that way, but we have deep associations to how we move, how I think, how I work with my hands, for example. As I'm talking, I use both of my hands. That's embodied cognition, mm-hmm. So there are so many dimensionalities to the way that we use the mind, but we're just not taught those skill sets. And I grew up really with that limiting belief that I wasn't smart. And medicine taught me how to use my mind in a more optimal way. And the more I started understanding creative cognition and developing those tools, going into more advanced practices like spatial thinking, like combinational thinking, then I can bring those tools into medicine space, which is a skill set. So it's not like, you're going to journey once and like learn how to navigate those realms. Think about it with like, do you sit with ayahuasca?
I have, yeah.
So when people start coming to ceremonies in community, their first journeys, it's like you're totally disoriented. Your brain is learning how to navigate a completely different landscape. It's hard to stand up. It's mm-hmm. hard to make it to the bathroom on your own. But yet there are other people that are drinking just as much, if not more medicine than you, and they're playing very complex songs on the guitar.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was wild. Yeah.
Right. And if you keep sitting, soon you'll have the strength and be able to stay cognitively coherent. That's an important concept, to sit up and to hold yourself and to pay attention to a very different landscape. And then you're able to learn the songs and then sing the songs. It's a skill set that you develop. I use the music as an example because it's something that we can see, but also creative thinking skills and creativity can be developed in the same way, except you're not outwardly projecting music, but you're developing frameworks and concepts in your mind that help you do a better job in your profession, for example. Everything that I create comes through Medicine Space. And so I'm teaching the frameworks that I've used and developed over the years to build my own curriculum as a thought leader. And being a thought leader, you're actually trying to introduce new ideas. You're breaking the status quo towards a direction that's in more harmonious alignment with the way that we live on this earth. Ultimately, we all know we can't keep going the way that we're going, which is why we're in this major meaning crisis. And so I'm over 25 years have practiced the skill set of building frameworks and curriculum in my mind, and then coming back to the computer on Monday morning and writing it.
And that framework that you build and that experience that you have in a ceremonial experience, for example, with Aya or a different type of deeper journey, when you exit that and you come back to your day-to-day life, the goal, as I'm hearing it expressed by you, is for multiple experiences with the medicines to start to build the construction of the framework in your mind, so that you can take that out into your day-to-day and integrate it into your everyday life.
Yeah, and there are so many ways that we could talk about this as being beneficial for other people listening, because I think it's also easy to jump to the conclusion of like, oh my God, you're working with medicine to like build a business and profit and make money. And it's like, that is such, limited thinking, because for me, I'm really like, and this is just from my own experience. So I'm not saying, oh, other people need to do it this way, but I feel like this is my path. Like this is my dharma in life. Like I was actually put on this planet to develop this kind of curriculum. What we're talking about is part of the curriculum that I teach. It's like teaching people how to snap out of old ways of perceiving to tune into a different dimension of reality, so that we can readjust our lives to be more harmonious. We call this stepping into right relationship as one, framework for it. How do I live in integrity within myself and between the work that I do and my creative channel and the other people that I live with and that I'm in relationship with? And how do I, be in this level of integrity and right relationship with my environment? And, one name for psychedelics is ecodelics. And that's something that resonates deeply for me because, my first journey was 25 years ago. And for the better part of 20 years, I've been living outside, literally open air living. This is literally the only wall.
Are you facing the forest right now?
Well, awesome. And I have no walls and a completely open kitchen. And so I'm not saying other people need to do that or that you can't be connected to nature by living inside, but over years, I've shifted my life because I've integrated the insights that I've received in Medicine Space slowly over time to literally, and I think this is for me, the essence of what medicines have taught me is how to become the architect of my life. And what I've learned over the years is that the blueprints are in the mind. And when I step into Medicine Space, I build the scaffolding of those blueprints. And then I translate them into my reality, and it has influenced where I wake up, how I spend my time, the quality of my life, and where I live, and how I orient, my entire attention, energy, devotion, the quality of my life has been informed by that process of integrating those insights into the fabric of my everyday life.
So you're talking about creating the architecture for your life, which you clearly have done. And which also, as somebody in the space, in a position like the one you have, gives a lot of confidence and authenticity to what you're doing, because you can show the actual proof of what happens when you consciously create a life, when you consciously create your life separate from and you drop any limiting beliefs or predispositions that you had before. Because if you lived in a tent on Venice Boulevard, then people might not take you as seriously. So that's it's really cool to see what you've been able to create for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that it's helpful to also point that people do see my life and they're like, wow, you're so lucky. And it's like, actually, the price that you pay, the cost of admission, is discomfort. And you have to flex courage on a daily basis, because there are a lot of people that really like to hate and throw shit at you. And that's one aspect of courage, but also, like, everything that I've done in my life that's been extraordinary has required me to really become very intimate with this feeling of discomfort, you know? And so when people are like, wow, you've lived such an amazing life, it's like, yeah, I have. And it's been really fucking hard too. You know?
Yeah.
I've had to overcome so many limiting beliefs, and I still work with them all the time. But, like, you know, when I spent almost 7 years living out of a backpack, traveling around the world, not knowing where I was going to sleep at night, and spent months motorbiking the Thai-Burma border. I spent 7 years of my life surfing. Like, that required a lot of courage, you know, to get up and do it every day. And you know, when I bought my first property in Hawaii, it led me to the volcanic eruption, which was the hardest experience of my life. And when we love, it's that same kind of vulnerability. You're opening your heart. You're like choosing love in this way that you're like, okay, it's like the most vulnerable thing is also creating and putting yourself out there and saying, like, this is what I got right now.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sharing it with you. It requires so much discomfort and courage to face that. It's the price of admission for leading a meaningful life.
Totally.
And so that's part of it. And without naming that, we're missing like 95% of the equation.
Totally. What was that 7-year period surfing like? That sounds insane.
Yeah, it was incredible. And, you know, I was a water baby growing up, and I've always, it's so interesting to think about how that really became like such a big part of my life from my earliest memories. And that's what I dove competitively as a kid. And one of my first memories actually was my dad holding me under the armpits, counting to 3 and tossing me in the deep end and saying, it's okay, you can swim. So that was like a big forbearing of my life. And I think that that's actually part of the reason that I really, you know, wanted to explore the deep end. And surfing is the most humbling experience of learning about like the essence of what it actually means to live with flow and be in flow and pay attention to a different dimension of reality. You're feeling the ocean, you feel the wave. You have to learn to shift your perception and drop into a more subtle dimension. So surfing has actually really taught me, it's been very parallel with psychedelics. And with my ex-partner, we actually used to do really high dose LSD journeys, and we used to go surfing and double overhead. And that was a big part of that chapter of my life. And we used to drop acid and go motorbiking. And so it taught me about mind-body connection. It taught me about perception. It taught me about so much. And right now, and this is the analogy that I use so much when I'm teaching, is like, we are experiencing tidal waves of change right now. And so if you don't learn the skill sets of how to surf, you're gonna get pummeled. And learning how to surf and transforming your life happens through mind, body, heart alignment. It's not just in your head. It's not just in your body. It's not just in doing. You need to learn how to align all three so that you can actually catch the wave. And I do think that these are the best of times and the worst of times. There's more uncertainty than ever before. The World Economic Forum just came out with their like 2023 report, and they said the one word we're going to name this next chapter of the economy is disruption. You know, they said tectonic shifts in the economy. God. Like a quarter of our job force is about to change. So it's like we can learn the skill sets, you know, and that's why even the World Economic Forum named creative thinking as the most important skill set of our time as a business organization, which I think says a lot about how we can orient around creativity and creative thinking and thinking differently, ultimately to inspire change. And with this vast, unknown of uncertainty, it's also an open field of possibility. And it's how we choose to pay attention. And it's also how we choose to hold space for discomfort, that if we try to, like we're, talking about like the weirdness of America. I'm Canadian, first of all, so I can diss Americans as much as I want. But it's like we've been conditioned, North Americans, we've been conditioned to be in the comfort zone, and people are like, oh my God, that's what living outside has taught me. It's like I've lived off grid and with water catchment. When it doesn't rain, you don't use water. It's a different way of orienting around how we live on this earth, and I think people are going to go through a really hard time in the next few years as they start realizing shit has got to change. Because when you live outside, it's not like, oh, you throw garbage out. There is no out. It's just over there. We're connected to this earth. There's no, and we just don't see it because we cover over it and we put it in a place out of sight, out of mind. But we are now in a moment of time where humanity has to deal with its own shit. Dig your own compost toilet.
Yep, you were out there surfing double barrels. It feels like this world is in a quadruple barrel right now, and we're just barely trying to stand up on a 6-foot board. But connecting deeper with yourself in order to connect deeper with the world around you has been such a massive tool for me, and it came a couple of years ago when I was reading about some of these Eastern philosophies of separating yourself from your emotional experience. So, in America or in a lot of the parts of the West, we'll say things like, I'm mad, I am angry, I am frustrated. But in the East, and I forget specifically where, they don't speak like that. They say, I have anger, I have frustration. And that can be, you can mirror that to multiple other experiences about being out here, being frustrated with whatever it is, being caught up in politics or money issues or whatever. But separating your true self from the emotions that are simply passing through your body. They're entering and they will exit at some point. I'm not mad right now. I don't have anger in me right now. A couple of weeks ago I did, when my flight got delayed by 4 hours and they refused to give me a voucher. Yeah, I had a whole lot of anger then, but I had to remind myself that I am not anger. I'm not angry. I am Brent. I am this energy that's in a meat sack right now for the next couple of decades or more. And that, for me at least, was the first step a couple of years ago toward deepening my connection to self, that then allowed me to deepen my connection to the world around me, because those emotions are part of the world around you. They're part of the energy that's flying around at all times, and they can enter and they will exit. So that's really, that's a great kind of 1-2 step down that road, I think. Did you, when you were getting into this space, what were some of your, who I guess, were some of your influences? Did you have people around you? Did you have any guides or stewards or anybody in the space that you were looking up to? I'm curious, like, what the ratio was between your own independent individual work and efforts versus people who might have guided you or taught you or stewarded you through the space.
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I see so many people as my teachers and a way to learn. I mean, we can learn from so many people around us if we open ourselves in that way. And yeah, there are a few people who are very, very close friends, and we've been sort of on the medicine path together for many years. And it's helpful to have integration buddies like that, because there's very few people who solo journey to that kind of depth, and it requires having that kind of lucid peer support reflection. So I have a few friends in my life who we've been really deepening in our own practice for over a decade, and we've been sort of tracking each other's journeys in those ways for a very long time. I would say my mother has been a huge influence and support for me in my life. She's taught me so much about how to navigate life, and my father in very different ways. And then other teachers, like what I mentioned earlier, my path with medicine has been so deeply embedded within learning Tibetan Buddhism and practicing those teachings. And Pema Chodron and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and that lineage has been foundational for transforming my life. Foundational. And I went through a phase where I would just sit and listen to Dharma teachings the whole time. And it transformed my mind in a completely different way. And I would bring in the practices, because those teachings are not just philosophy, they're actually embodied practices. There are specific techniques for working with the nature of mind and also working with triggers and habitual patterns. It's like zooming in on a microscopic level of how we get hooked and how to unhook ourselves so that we can open up to the flow of life, which is, I think, such a foundational teaching for us in general, especially Americans. Everyone is so fucking trigger happy. Everyone is so triggered by everything and so offended by everything that it's like, there's really good medicine in working with that and actually not taking things so personally. And we all do it to one degree or another. And it's learning actually how to zoom in on the microscopic level. And we all work with that. Like, do I eat the cookie? I shouldn't eat the cookie. I want the cookie, but don't eat the cookie. You're not, it's like on that level times a million for all of us. Like, you feel like, that's my ongoing joke, is like, you can be enlightened, but you get on 30-minute call with AT&T customer support. AT&T customer support has been like the bane of my existence. I go from like, I am total, calm to I'm losing my shit, you know, because if you pass me over to one more other person and the call drops one more time, I am going to lose my shit right now. And so we all have it in certain ways, and learning how to work with that, as you were saying at the airport, it's like, oh, the true nature of reality is that everything is in motion. It's just energy in motion. And that's why Eastern philosophy points to the same thing that we experience in psychedelic space, which is like, wow, everything is just energy in motion. And when I said, become the architect of your life, that's what I've learned, is that this life is so malleable. It's so shapeable, and we have agency to shape it, but yet we're in a fixed identity construct. It's the 3 marks of existence. One of them is impermanence. The true nature of reality is that everything is impermanent. We know this on a science level at this point. This is not woo, this is quantum physics. And then the second mark of existence applies that to identity, and it gives us teachings to become more fluid in our sense of identity and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And we get so fixed and we identify as, this is who I am. And then we stay stuck in that box, and it's safe, but it's also debilitating. And we don't realize that that's what we're doing. And that's where the parallel with psychedelics comes in, is because what they do on an actual neural level in the brain is that they help quiet the default mode network. And we can actually learn tools to leverage those windows of cognitive flexibility to say, okay, I have a little bit of flexibility in my identity construct right now. And this is why scaffolding is a good analogy, because you don't want to, like, identity construct is helpful, but you want to be fluid in it and not rigid in it.
Right.
Because if you completely lose your marbles, that's a psychotic break. And that's, sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes I'll go into journeys and be like, wow, I've just been like working really hard. I need to let my marbles roll for a minute and just like let that shit go. But I engage with it from that place, and I allow my identity construct to be more fluid and flexible, and traveling also teaches that too, because you're always meeting new people and you're like, oh, who do I want to be today?
Yeah. And you force yourself to get outside your comfort zone, physically and mentally. Mentally by meeting other people and putting yourself in social situations that you wouldn't otherwise experience, and physically by being in a new place that you might not recognize, that you might not know how to operate in. What can you talk a little bit about the different compounds that you've worked with in relation to creativity, and if there are any that you might have a different perspective toward in its use for this intention versus others?
Oh my gosh, this is such a loaded question because
Yeah.
I'm white, so I'll just name it. This is
Uh-huh.
like a major, because some of the medicines that I work with come with a lot of narrative around who should and should not be working with them and how. And so
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. And
Yeah.
and so I don't want to put a black and white, I can do whatever the fuck I want. It's more like uh, I've cultivated a very deep relationship with tending to plants and growing my own medicines and making my own medicines for my own journey. And actually, so much of what I learn on the medicine path is through the cultivation of how I tend to medicines. And I've had many, many years of working with psilocybin. I love sacred mushrooms. Oh my gosh, they're such a joy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my best experiences in my life. But I also love LSD. It's funny because like psychedelics and synthetic compounds are kind of getting like a back seat in our spiritual community of sacred plant medicines, sacred earth medicines.
Right. Right.
I have bowed at the altar of LSD so many times and have been so humbled by the wisdom of that medicine.
And LSD though is derived from ergot too. Yeah, so it's still technically got some organic compounds in it.
Well, it's synthetic. Most of it's like psilocin. You can now make synthetic psilocin. But, Maria Sabina was brought synthetic psilocybin and given that, and she was like, there's a spirit in this.
Yeah.
And this is such a wormhole of a conversation. And I also do have a very deep practice with ayahuasca as well. And, I have been in experiences online where people have really attacked me because of being a white woman talking about my relationship to ayahuasca. And things are changing. So many people are talking about it now that it's changing. But like when I came out of the psychedelic closet publicly, like 5 years ago, I lost like 8,000 followers like overnight. It was
Wow.
like a big deal because things have changed so much in 5 years. And at that point, I was already working with ayahuasca as a personal practice for over a decade, And so people, and I do want to say like a lot of disclaimers here, because I do have a practice with microdosing Banisteriopsis caapi, and that's something that I've cultivated as a practice for about 15 years, and that's ayahuasca vine. And I work with that, and it's funny to even like label it. I don't want to call it microdosing because it sounds like I'm talking about cultivating a deep practice with a medicine that helps to clear the creative channel and live your life in a more integral way. It's really the foundation of my life. And I would say that that's my primary plant teacher and my primary medicine, that I really devote to those teachings and that realm of consciousness, because it's very distinct quality. It's very different than LSD and psilocybin. And after many years of working with those other medicines, which I still love to partake in, I feel different. Like I feel like ayahuasca is my teacher, and even that for me has looked very different than what it should supposedly look like, And so I've definitely beat to my own drum through and through.
And that's fine though to me. But my opinion on that is, we're not going to be able to spread these medicines or these relationships with these different compounds or these practices on a wider scale unless we open up the opportunities to people, and we open up our, we veer slightly away from what the traditional paths were, while maintaining a very deep level of respect and honor and recognition for where these practices and compounds and plants all came from. And I think that's doable.
I think that that's, you just named it, like the level of it's about bringing a sense of reverence and respect and not just being willy-nilly, that actually there's a container that you learn to cultivate for a reason, because these medicines can open up huge portals of energy. And we all talk about flow states, for example, like, oh, I want to tap into flow. When you actually learn how to cultivate flow, it's an enormous responsibility, because if you don't know how to channel that energy in an intentional way, it can be very destructive, not just to you, but to people around you. And so it's actual mastery. And so when you walk this path, as I'm cultivating this as a path of mastery, as a path of working with energy in a way that brings a lot of respect and reverence and humility, then it is the embodiment of that, you know? And it's interesting that we do hear, I hear people hold stories like this all the time, that even, you know, plants shouldn't, that people shouldn't be drinking or planting or cultivating ayahuasca in Hawaii. But I'm like, well, actually, the truth is that it is in Hawaii, and people have been growing it, you know. And I'm so grateful for Terrence McKenna and other people that I know, that I've been very blessed to receive the harvest of their forethought, you know, to plant these medicines. And so one thing I will absolutely say is that the decisions that I make. One second. Oye, Raymond. Necesita 10 minutos más, por favor. So what I will say that is central to my decision-making process is sustainability. So there are medicines that I choose not to engage with, because there are, for example, peyote, there are hundreds of thousands of Native Americans who that is their path, their religious sacrament, and many Native Americans don't have access to their own medicine, and they're actually asking us as a culture to refrain from consuming it. And so I just try to be a good psychedelic citizen, where I'm like, okay, of course, like, you know, I look at elders as aunties and uncles. That's very much Hawaiian orientation. I lived in Hawaii for 10 years. And so it's like, I see these elders, I'm like, auntie, of course, I don't need that medicine. You have it. Like, let me create space for you to have it, because that's your lineage. And so, and there is debate around the sustainability of ayahuasca, but for many years, I grew my own and made my own medicine. It was a closed loop circle. You know, I tended to my own plants. That taught me a lot about what it means to walk this medicine path, and would basically make that medicine for just myself and not for other people, but just for me. And in the making of it, it teaches you an enormous amount about what this path is really, really all about.
Yeah. I think it is important to have a bit of communal commitment toward the proper stewardship of these medicines. And at the same time, I, maybe this is naivety, but I don't see psychedelics, in particular these types of plant medicines, becoming commercialized and having the same type of cultural placement as like hard drugs, for example, which is what I've heard a lot of people talk about. You know, we need to make sure that mushrooms aren't just being passed around in the clubs, and there's no like tobacco shop with like mushrooms on the counter that have a bunch of weird stuff in them. I don't really see that. Like, I don't see a scummy guy at a nightclub trying to sell dime bags of ayahuasca powder. You know, I don't really see that happening.
I mean, and recently I actually met someone who's selling Banisteriopsis caapi gummies, ayahuasca gummies. Whoa. And another thing I'll say is that I have supported hundreds of people through cultivating a practice of microdosing ayahuasca vine, because I have had a lot of experience in it, and it's a very powerful antidepressant, and it's also an MAOI, and it comes with a lot of contraindications that you have to be aware of. So like, there's just disclaimers all over this, you know, I wouldn't recommend buying it online and just starting to willy-nilly play with that. There is a very strong spirit to that medicine. And there's also a lot of medical contraindications, food contraindications. So you have to be aware of, you know, what you're doing. But yeah, I'm not hierarchical in the sense of like, I still love to go to Burning Man and enjoy in a good old candy flip.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
I think that that's an orientation around like always I respect a lot of paths, and I also respect my calling to carve a path that feels true for me, and to just also come back, and before we move on to another topic, like being a good psychedelic citizen for me is not like this topic of like shame and reciprocity, and a lot of people, there's just so much like heaviness around that conversation. And for me, I'm like, okay, if you drink ayahuasca, you become part of a global ayahuasca community. And there are people on the block who are holding it down for a long time. They're holding down like wisdom traditions and ways of knowing. And they're actually holding down the protection of the Amazon forest. And they're asking for help. And so it's like, as a person in the global ayahuasca community, I'm like, absolutely, I want to help you. Not because I'm like, oh, I took this thing and the narrative is that I'm a white person and I took the thing from you and now I have to like shamefully give back. It's like, no, I'm like a human Homo sapien sapien on planet Earth with every other Homo sapien sapien on this planet right now. And we're like at a critical moment of crises, and we're all in the sinking ship together.
Mm-hmm. Riding this triple barrel.
So it's like, yeah, let me support the person that I also respect their method of like their way of thinking and their orientation, their cosmovision of their place within nature, and they're protecting the Amazon rainforest. And like, if we don't protect that forest in 15 years, we're going to have massive ecological collapse in ways that we've never seen before. Mm-hmm. So, I'm just like, yeah, psychedelics wake us up to being better humans.
Yeah, which they do. As we wrap up in a few minutes, I want to do a little thought experiment with you, because we're talking a lot about the future. We're talking about where we're at now, where we're headed, what's in store for this sinking ship of Earth, and how we could possibly plug the holes to get back on course. This is pure thought experiment. If you could work with other leaders in the space that you look up to, you revere, come from places of good intention within this area of psychedelics as medicine and using plant medicines for various purposes to allow people to live better lives and heal the world, what does that look like 20 years from now? In the sense that, currently we have different pillars that we all reach in life. At 16, we get a driver's license. At 18, we can vote. At 21, we can drink. At 28 or whatever, we have to get our driver's license renewed. We have to have health insurance. We have to, all of these things. If you could get together with your dream team of psychedelic warriors and create kind of a rubric of recommendations, like, you don't want to force people or require people to do certain things, but although some people should be forced, dude, 100%. I say that on stage. I got a whole bit on stage where I say I think candidates should be required to take psychedelics, because the debates would not be debates anymore. They would be cuddle puddles with house music, and it would be amazing. If you could get together with a psychedelic dream team to create kind of a rubric of recommendations for people, and the government said, hey, whatever you guys pass to us as recommendations, we will put out to the public. What do you think could be some of those recommendations for adults, kids, whatever, to help people evolve just a little bit more in the way that we've talked about in this conversation? Would it be, and I don't want to give you any ideas, actually. I just want to hear what you think. You want a couple ideas? So I'm talking about, like, would you recommend microdosing protocols? Would you recommend one deep journey per year? Would you recommend that everybody of a certain mental caliber have an ayahuasca experience? Would you recommend presidents take psychedelics? Like, what would be some of the recommendations that you and your dream team of psychedelic spiritual guides would have to encourage people to think differently using these medicines?
I would say, oh gosh, this is such a tough question because it's this like caveats abound.
Yeah.
But I think one really, okay, I was expecting you to ask me, so I like my mind was like caught in a different direction because I was like, oh, if I could work with any leader, who would it be? And I was like, Brene Brown.
Oh, that was coming next. Yeah. Okay, cool.
And like, you know, Oprah, like, let me dive in with these people.
Yeah.
Okay, but I actually think a really helpful practice for leadership development would be microdosing and comedy improv together, like learning the foundational tenets of stand-up comedy, but like improv comedy in groups, and mini dosing LSD kind of journeys, you know, anything like that, where it's like breaking frame, teaching people creative thinking skills in situations like that, and where you can actually just like let it loose and laugh your fucking ass off, and you know, do it in a really amazing place. And actually on our land here in Costa Rica, we have this area that is like built to be an amphitheater. And when we walked there, I was like, we're going to do LSD improv here.
Oh, that's so like, fun.
Yes. Yeah. And so things like that, you know, and also just permission that it's okay to like be journeying in nature, and that there are, you know, precautions that you need to take. Bring the backpack with the water bottle, bring the flashlight because it's probably going to get dark. You're going to be out there, you know, and be safe and have a buddy. And I wish there was more education around safe outdoor journeying and safe outdoor tripping, instead of, you know, the image that everyone has, which is like, oh, we think of psychedelics now, and we think of being in a box with a therapist next to us and an eye mask and a, you know, on a couch. And it's like, okay, that's 1% maybe. But there's so much more. There's so much more. Yeah.
Who would you like to work with in that space?
Brene Brown. I really want to be the Brene Brown of psychedelics. That's like what I aspire to in my life. And
for those who don't know, Brene Brown.
Oh, I mean, she's incredible. She's written so many books, and she's leadership and authenticity and vulnerability and yeah, but she talks about creativity too. Yeah, I think Brene Brown definitely comes to mind. And then people like Oprah, who have inspired me so much, but she's crushing it, you know? Yeah. And when I was at a Joe Dispenza retreat, I was like, you know, this guy needs to explore psychedelics. So much of what he's talking about is applicable to the psychedelic state. And I asked him, I got to meet him and I asked him, and he was like, you know, didn't have anything to do with it. But then when he was on stage, he was like, someone just handed me this book, How to Change Your Mind. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, okay, Joe, you're going to be tripping balls here in like a year, you know? So I think, you know, combining a lot of that kind of framework around how to change your life is really applicable, you know, to working with psychedelics.
Definitely.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people that I feel like could really benefit from this. I actually wrote an article years ago called Time to Spike the Presidential Punch. And really, yeah, and I wrote it on Medium, and was just like outlining all the reasons that it would be so beneficial, that really all of our leaders on a world scale should actually come to know the nature of their own mind and how they make decisions.
That is so cool. It's called Time to Spike the Presidential Punch.
Yeah, I'll send you a link.
Please, yeah, I'll put it in the show notes for the episode. That's super rad. Laura, you rock. Where can people find out more about your work and get in touch?
I just launched a 6-month facilitator training program for psychedelic coaches and integration guides and microdosing mentors who want to learn this framework that helps support people on the path of psychedelic transformation. And as I kind of alluded to in our conversation, it starts at a different starting point. It's not about reducing depression and curing mental illness, but enhancing human flourishing. And so the foundational principles are really built on the pillars of adaptability and resiliency and creativity. And the program is actually called Transilience, which is an old word that has gone out of fashion, but it's about leaping forward. And in the process of leaping, we transform from one state to another state. And it's a word that's gone out of fashion, but it is really truly my dharma, my path, my legacy work to bring this word back into our cultural vocabulary, because there is no rebounding back. That's what resilience talks about, is, going back to a previous state, but there's no going back, folks.
Yeah.
This is a leaping forward kind of moment. And that's a skill set. And Transilience is a skill set. And it's really the focus of the work that I do with psychedelics. And so I'm teaching other people this framework.
Transitioning with resilience.
Yep. Yeah, it's basically, imagine transition and transformation and resilience had a love child. Transilience would be it. It's about learning how to foster transition resilience and transforming ourselves, because this is the era of reinvention. We have to adapt to these times of change. And that's where learning, more fluidity in our identity constructs really helps. And learning how to tell a new story about how we orient and draw new levels of meaning, because people are feeling that. People built their lives around systems that are disintegrating. We need to learn how to reorient around life in a very different way right now. Yeah, I agree. I appreciate you so much, Laura. You rock. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all go check her out and check out the show notes for the article on why every president should take MDMA before a debate. See y'all. Hey, thank you guys so much for checking out this week's episode. You can learn more about Laura and her work at lauradawn.co. That's LauradaWN.co. And on Instagram at LiveFreeLauraD. You can get my tour dates at brettpella.com/shows. And make sure y'all optimize your health at legitgold.com. You can use code Brent for 15% off your order, and cruise over to hemplucid.com for my favorite CBD. Use promo code PELLA for a discount on your order. Until next time, I hope y'all have a wonderful week.